All right, welcome back. After a week off because of Hurricane Irma that smacked the hell out of Naples, hope everybody down there is still okay. We're back with a brand new episode. Thank you for coming back. As always, check out politicallycharged.us for all of our new episodes. It's got all the social media on there. And, of course, find out ways to get involved. Got a whole page for that. We're going to skip last week's news because, well, I mean, you know, it's last week's news. This week, we've got competing healthcare plans from Democrats and Republicans, a deal to protect dreamers that nobody really seems to know what, if anything, has actually been agreed to, and Republicans, once again, hiding behind closed doors to craft a new tax plan. So, let's start with healthcare. Republican Senators Bill Cassidy and Lindsey Graham presented new healthcare legislation designed to repeal the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare. This bill, which, if passed, might end up being even more disruptive and hurtful than past attempts at repealing Obamacare, essentially shuts down the entirety of the Affordable Care Act, replacing it with a system of block grants for state governments that they can spend essentially as they see fit. Unlike under the Affordable Care Act, the tax credits for middle-income Americans and subsidies for low-income Americans would no longer exist. The GOP continues to wage war on people that need healthcare the most, getting rid of tax credits for middle-income Americans and subsidies for low-income Americans. The bill includes no individual mandate, resulting in higher premiums because healthy people may opt to forego insurance because they feel they don't need it. Once again, the Republicans have presented us a crap bill that takes aim at those that really need insurance the most. Instead of working to provide better coverage for those that need it, they've instead opted to focus on dismantling the Affordable Care Act, continuing their war against President Obama's legacy while ignoring the harm that they'll inflict on everyday Americans. It's absolutely ridiculous that these Republican senators and House Republicans are so willing to hurt the people they're supposed to be representing just to spite President Obama, who's not even in office anymore. It's ridiculous. I don't know how they still have jobs. Thankfully, Republicans only have until September 30th to pass this legislation because of the reconciliation process rules that they've been using to modify, replace, whatever you want to call it. And support for this bill is thin among Senate leadership and even the White House. That's how you know your bill is complete crap, when the White House won't get near it. The same White House that hired Anthony Scaramucci, hired Reince Priebus, hired Steve Bannon, won't support your healthcare bill. That's probably a sign it's time to give it up. Meanwhile, good old Bernie Sanders has begun to capitalize on his newfound gravitas in the Democratic Party, announcing framework for a healthcare plan that is essentially Medicare for all. Thus far, he's received more than a dozen co-sponsors for the framework, including almost all of the leading 2020 presidential candidates on the Democratic side, of course. This includes big names like Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Kamala Harris. Bernie's plan would offer Medicare to every person in America while eliminating copayments and deductibles while expanding the services that Medicare actually covers. So it would be an all-encompassing healthcare overhaul for all intents and purposes. Now, because this plan is simply framework at this point and not an actual bill, much is still unknown. It's still up in the air in terms of the details. Instead, it relies on broad ideas like raising taxes on the wealthy, pointing out that other countries have universal health care and actually it costs them less than our healthcare system, both of which were hallmarks of Bernie's campaign for president. While this idea of Medicare for all definitely won't become law in 2017, it appears as if it will most likely be a major part of the Democratic platform moving forward, especially when all of the leading 2020 candidates co-sign it. I really like this idea of universal health care, of single payer. I believe we really do need to end up with a universal healthcare system in this country. But at this stage, all this plan is framework. And before making such a big change to healthcare, I don't know about you guys, but I would feel way more comfortable if all the details were brought out to light and, weren't decided behind closed doors where nobody but Democrats know what's going on. So we'll see what happens with healthcare going forward. The Republican plan definitely will not be passed. It's almost more draconian than past attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Plus, because there's only 52 Republican senators, they can only afford to lose 2 and have the tie broken by the vice president. And they've already lost more than that. So as of right now, The Republican health care bill floated by Cassidy and Graham is dead in the water. It has no chance of passing, but we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. And then Bernie Sanders' plan, it won't happen in 2017, but I think it'll become a major 2018 midterm election idea. It'll be something that's tossed around, talked about a lot. And then 2020, that's the year that something would probably happen. So from there, let's move on to the Dreamer deal that may or may not actually exist. Wednesday night, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi walked out of a White House dinner with the president and announced that they had agreed to a deal to protect Dreamers. One small problem with that. Trump's involved, so nobody has any idea what the hell is going on. Apparently, the agreement in the meeting was not written out, so nobody really has any idea what's been agreed to or if anything's actually been agreed to. Now, the anti-immigration wing of the Republican Party, which is really almost all of the Republican Party now, immediately hit back at Trump, including his dear friends at Breitbart, run by the Grim Reaper. But everyone's favorite morning show, Fox and Friends, appears to have sided with Trump on this decision, speaking volumes about Fox simply being pro-Trump instead of pro-conservative like they're supposed to be. If this ever turns into actual legislation, there's a good chance it can pass. Judging by Fox and Friends' reaction, the Republican base will kind of begrudgingly follow Trump to the ends of the earth. It'd be political suicide for someone to oppose protecting Dreamers, not to mention protecting them is unquestionably the right thing to do and absolutely should be done. There's very few details about this plan out there other than that they've agreed to protect Dreamers and fund more border security that does not include the wall. But again, there's so much ambiguity here, nobody really has any idea what the hell is going on. So we'll see what, if anything, actually comes out of this. And I really hope that something positive does come out of this because Trump's war against Dreamers is un-American, it's unpatriotic, it's prejudiced. It's everything bad about the Trump administration, all rolled into one. So I absolutely hope something good comes out of this. As long as they didn't agree to fund the wall, whatever concessions they made, it's all right. Dreamers are worth protecting. When you're struggling to do something, one approach is to move on to something easier and try to build momentum for yourself, right? Well, Republicans have done the exact opposite of this, turning their attention from their failed healthcare legislation to tax reform, something that everybody knows is infinitely easier. As always, House Republicans are being held hostage by the far right wingers who are pushing for spending cuts to pretty much everything under the sun. President Trump continues to make promises he's unable to, or it's just simply impossible to keep for Republicans, saying his tax cuts will not benefit the rich at all. Okay. Meanwhile, Democrats are stuck between a rock and a hard place. House Republicans want a revenue-neutral plan, which Democrats like, while Trump says he does not want the plan to benefit the rich, something Democrats also like. So in theory, bipartisan legislation should be fairly easy to achieve, but Republicans are once again doing exactly what they did with their healthcare bill, hiding behind closed doors, so we have no way of knowing what in the hell they're actually doing. Now, our final story of this episode, President Trump versus Jamel Hill. For those of you that don't know, Jamel Hill is an anchor of the 6 p.m. time slot of SportsCenter on ESPN, and has recently come under fire from President Trump for calling him a white supremacist, to which the President of the United States started using his official platform, Twitter, and government resources, his press secretary, to get a private citizen fired for criticizing him. For those of you that live under a rock, like I said, Jamel Hill is an ESPN anchor. She was engaged in a back and forth on Twitter that when she called President Trump a white supremacist, saying, "Trump is the most ignorant, offensive president of my lifetime. His rise is a direct result of white supremacy, period." Following her tweets, she apologized for putting ESPN in an awkward position, but did not back down from her comments. ESPN reportedly went so far as to attempt to remove her from her show, but backed down when her co-host refused to do the show without her, and no one would agree to replace her. So, let's be completely honest. She's right. President Trump has done absolutely nothing to dissuade the idea that he's a white supremacist, or at very least understands his rhetoric is popular among white supremacists. He failed to denounce white supremacists immediately after the violence in Charlottesville. He's dodged questions about denouncing the KKK. He infamously was a leader in pushing the birther theory about President Obama. And, of course, he's made those disgusting comments about Mexican immigrants. I mean, when you're regularly lauded for your rhetoric and actions by white supremacist groups, you're one of two things. Either you are the most ignorant person alive and do not realize that that's the tone your rhetoric has, or you're a white supremacist. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's just the way it is. And now he's attempting to use the bully pulpit of the presidency, not for legislating, not for improving the lives of his constituents, not to do really much of anything, except for trying to get someone fired for expressing an opinion and then using actual statements and facts to back it up. So that wraps up this week's episode of Politically Charged. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back on our normal Monday morning uploads from now on. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're hearing this. Check out politicallycharged.us. You can find all of our episodes, social media, ways to get involved, all that good stuff. This Thursday, keep an eye out. Thursday morning, keep an eye out for a new episode coming out. Hopefully, some things line up and I can get that done. And with that, we out.